Greetings. Today we're going to talk about why you're not losing fat. People still don't fully grasp the carb-fat concept, so I'll try to make this real simple. It does make sense that if you don't eat enough calories to maintain your body weight, then you'll lose weight. However, if fat loss were that simple as a whole, it would be easy. The thing is, you have two things working against you. One, the body sacrifices muscle first before it starts to eat fat. There's a 36 to 48 hour window right when the body goes catabolic where it starts to consume itself. But you have to know if you're not in ketosis, the body will burn carbs and muscle. Two, and this is big, many people are eating toxic food and obesogens that turn off fat burning mechanisms at the hormonal and cellular level. Now I suggest you look up obesogens or obesity because these things are destroying endocrine systems and few people are really talking about it, but it's making it so that people who under certain conditions would lose fat still cannot. Meaning you could be doing all the right peripheral work concerning fat loss, but if you're missing or lacking in one step, your damaged system will not burn fat. Now, ketosis is the one tool that I know of that defeats even a resistant fat oxidation state. And let me briefly explain something, if you will. I recently heard an analogy of how keto works that I think really simplifies how you can see exactly what's happening. When you eat a standard or high carb intake, the body will always pull from that food source and open your fat cells for calorie storage, no matter how small your meals. Now imagine that energy for your body is in a refrigerator, okay? Your body will only pull from either the freezer or the refrigerator. Now it has to go into the freezer compartment and able to access your fat cells. In other words, it will pull from the freezer when it is burning fat only. It will pull from the refrigerator when it's burning carbs. So again, it has to go into the freezer compartment to pull from your fat cells, but it will only go into the freezer if the refrigerator is empty. When you're in ketosis, the refrigerator is empty. Therefore, the body will pull fat from the freezer. However, as long as you eat carbs, you're putting food into the refrigerator and the freezer won't open. Even if you put a Coke or a cupcake in the refrigerator, the body will pull that out first and use it. As long as any food, i.e. carbs, are in that fridge, no matter how small, that freezer is not going to open. Remember, it's only going to open the freezer when the refrigerator is empty. Anytime you have anything in that refrigerator, it won't go into the freezer where it can burn the fat. This is one reason why diets eventually plateau. And then you add to that fact that obesogens are hidden everywhere, and it's easy to see why some people just cannot burn fat. Now, people tell me all the time that you can lose fat by just reducing calories. When you go on a diet via reduction of food, even if the foods are carbs, of course you're going to see weight loss because carbs carry water, and a reduction in carbs equals a reduction in water, which results in a reduction of weight. Now, everyone knows this, but many people may not know why, as I just explained. There are studies that suggest or say calorie or fat reduction alone will cause a fat loss, and we're talking about a fat loss here now. But it's nothing like the fat loss modality of carb reduction. Let me show you the types of studies and the word magic that deceive people. Okay, so for this study it says, for 2 weeks they were kept in a lab around the clock where scientists would provide them with a precise diet. One group got a low-carb diet that reduced their total calories by 30%. Another group went on a low-fat diet that also reduced their total calories by 30%. Then, after a few weeks of rest, the two groups switched diets, meaning the low-carb group went on the low-fat diet after 2 weeks, and the low-fat diet group went on the low-carb diet. So they switched. Okay, we got that clear. As Hall now reports in the Journal of Cell Metabolism, cutting carbs did work. We cut the carbohydrates, insulin went down, and fat burning went up, exactly the way the theory predicts, and people lost fat, Hall says. The average participant lost about a pound of fat over 2 weeks and about 4 pounds of total weight. But Hall's study also showed that the low carb, low insulin conditions were not necessary to shed the body fat. In fact, the low fat diet also led to the loss of about 1 pound of body fat. So it was just as good. So here's the word magic. If they switched, how can you say the low fat diet specifically led to a loss of fat as much as the carb diet when they switched? Now, you might say, well, he said that the low carb, low insulin conditions were not necessary to shed body fat. In fact, the low fat diet also led to a loss of about 1 pound of body fat. But if they switched, how would you know that? How would you know whether it was the carbs or the fat if the two groups switched diets and you measured after 4 weeks? Now, it says right here, the average participant lost about a pound of fat over 2 weeks. They specify that 2 weeks. Okay, and this is the low carb group. So he specifies that the low carb group lost a pound of fat over 2 weeks. But he says also, the study showed that the low carb insulin conditions were not necessary to shed body fat. In the low fat diet, in fact, the low fat diet also led to a loss of about 1 pound of body fat. But how long did it take him to do that? Did the low fat diet lead to a loss of 1 pound after 2 weeks or after the full 4 weeks? Why did you fail to say whether it was 2 or 4 weeks when it came to the low fat diet? You should have said also after 2 weeks the low fat diet group lost a pound of body fat, but you didn't do that. So how do we know that this low fat group did not lose the 1 pound in 4 weeks? How do we know it didn't take them the full 4 weeks to lose that? How do we know that the low fat group lost that weight because they switched to the carb? So I hope that's clear. What you can see is that they specified here for the low carb group, they let you know that after 2 weeks, they lost that fat. But when it came to the low fat group, who they purport loses just as much weight as the low carb group, they didn't specify. So it could have been the full 4 weeks, which would have mean that the 2 weeks of low carb contributed to the overall loss of that pound for the low fat group. All right, this stuff gets pretty slick, but I'm only dogged about this because I know that the science states and the study state and the empirical data state that if you go on a low fat intake, but you're still juicing up on carbs, your weight loss is going to be limited. It's just that simple, because in the presence of certain amounts of insulin, the body will not burn fat. So when we see things like this, the slick stuff, we have to be suspicious. But this is why I stand doggedly behind my claim, my assertion, that you need that insulin, that carb reduction, in order to effectively burn fat. Now, if you reduce fat intake, by default, you reduce calories. So of course you're going to get a weight reduction per se if other conditions are met. But that will not cause the endocrine system to increase fat oxidation to facilitate fat burning. That doesn't prime your body to want to burn fat like carb reduction does. Fat and calorie reduction are temporary fixes, to make it simple, while carb reduction puts the body in a metabolic and hormonal fat burning state. I see through the games because of my base experience in facts. I don't just read and believe. In fact, I didn't really immediately accept keto intake theory until I studied it for a period of time to develop a thematic body of information on it. So if I speak on something, I try my hardest to have several sources of study on it. So until next video, peace. If you learned from this video, help support the study and time to bring this knowledge to our community. It does take time and effort to be concise and as accurate as possible so that we can stay abreast of important health information and techniques. Please visit the site and follow these links.